It's because of my relationship with Sean and John Huston, the director.
That's right.
We had a wonderful time on that. And Sean is one of my closest friends anyway, and was before that.
The life and sad ending of Sean Connery. Thomas Connery, named Thomas after his grandfather, was born in Fountainbridge, Edinburgh, Scotland, on the 25th of August, 1930.
At 91, Michael Caine broke a silence that had lasted a lifetime. For decades, he guarded the truth about his closest friend, Sean Connery, the man the world called James Bond. But behind the tuxedo and the legend was a story too complex for headlines and too personal for interviews. Now, with time catching up and memories growing heavier, Caine is finally ready to speak. What he reveals is not gossip. It's truth wrapped in loyalty, pain, and love. This isn't about fame. This is about friendship, legacy.
Memorable roles such as Alfred the Butler in Batman Begins, opposite Christian Bale, have helped make Michael Caine a living legend. There's more to a legend than that.
And the hidden battles of a man who once ruled the screen, but struggled behind it. The silence breaks at 91. At 91, Michael Caine finally sat down to do something he had avoided for decades. With a quiet voice and a distant look in his eyes, he began to open up about the man the world knew as James Bond.
Connery is best known for playing the British secret agent James Bond across more than a half-dozen films. He was 90 years old. Mark Phillips looks back on Sean Connery's life.
Not the smooth-talking secret agent, but the real Sean Connery, the man behind the tuxedo, the one who carried secrets, scars, and a story too painful to share while he was alive. It wasn't easy for Caine. This wasn't a press interview. This was an emotional release. People had always speculated. The media whispered. The tabloids wrote. But Michael stayed silent, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. He knew Sean in ways no headline ever could. He saw the man when the cameras were off, when the lights had faded, and when the world wasn't watching. And now, years after Connery's passing, Caine felt the weight of truth pressing against his chest.
Tributes have been paid to the movie legend Sean Connery, who has died aged 90. He shot to fame as James Bond 007 and later won an Oscar for his role in The Untouchables.
It was time. With trembling words, he didn't just confirm the rumors. He gave them context. He gave them emotion. This wasn't about gossip. It was about grief, about legacy, and about saying what no one else dared to say. The truth wasn't glamorous. It was painful. But Michael believed the world deserved to know who Sean Connery really was. And for the first time, he let us in. Bond was just a mask. Everyone admired Sean Connery as the original James Bond, bold, fearless, and effortlessly charming. But what Michael Caine revealed was that Bond was just a mask, a perfectly worn disguise hiding a much more fragile reality. Behind the iconic character stood a man who struggled with identity, anger, and the haunting shadows of his past. It wasn't always easy being Sean Connery. Fame was his gift and his burden. Michael shared how Connery often battled with himself. The world saw confidence, but he saw conflict. There were nights they sat in silence, no words exchanged, just two friends, understanding each other without needing to explain. Connery rarely talked about his childhood, but when he did, Michael noticed how his voice shifted. Softer, sadder, as if he was still trapped in a time he couldn't forget. This wasn't a movie. This was real life and real pain. The rumors people heard about Connery's temper, his distance from Hollywood, even his retreat from fame, they weren't lies, but they were misunderstood. He wasn't angry at the world. He was trying to protect himself from it. Caine said Sean had learned early on to guard his heart, to smile when hurting, to act when broken, and that's what made his silence so loud. Sean Connery didn't live as Bond. He hid behind him. And for the first time, someone close to him dared to remove the mask. The unspoken pact. There was an unspoken pact between them, Michael and Sean, A friendship forged not in the bright flashes of fame, but in quiet conversations, shared meals, and long walks no one photographed. They had promised, without words, to protect each other's silence. They both knew the game. Hollywood gives and Hollywood takes, and some truths are too heavy for the public to carry. Michael remembered the way Sean would change the subject when interviews got personal. He didn't trust the world with his wounds. Fame had taught him that vulnerability was dangerous. But in private, Connery sometimes opened up, not fully, never completely, but enough to let Michael see behind the curtain. Enough to show that the legend was, in fact, a lonely man. They never judged each other. That's what made their friendship real. Sean didn't need to perform around Michael, and Michael never asked questions Sean didn't want to answer. But now, decades later, Michael could no longer hold the weight of that pact alone. Not because he was betraying Sean, but because he believed the truth would honor him, not weaken him. As he spoke, you could see it. Michael wasn't looking for attention. He wasn't chasing headlines. He was carrying out something sacred. He wanted the world to remember Sean, not as a mystery, but as a man, flawed, brilliant, and deeply human. Their silence had protected him. But now, breaking that silence might be the only way to protect his legacy. Shadows of the past. Connery's childhood wasn't filled with red carpets or applause. It was harsh, cold, and unforgiving.
On the red carpet at the world-famous Kodak Theater in Hollywood, where tonight Sir Sean Connery is being honored with the Life Achievement Award by the AFI. All the stars are going to be out to honor the Oscar winner's brilliant career, which spans more than 40 years.
Born into poverty in Edinburgh, Sean grew up knowing hunger before he knew hope. Michael Caine never forgot how his friend described those early years, with clenched hands and a voice that trembled. "It teaches you to fight," Connery once said, "but it also teaches you to hide." Those experiences left marks no award could erase. Sean's distrust of the industry, his distance from people, his protective walls, they all made sense when you knew where he came from. Michael said Sean was shaped by survival, not stardom. Fame didn't heal the past. It only buried it deeper. Many of the rumors that followed Connery, his mood swings, his sudden disappearances, even his cold demeanor, were echoes of those childhood shadows. He had mastered the art of emotional camouflage. Bond wasn't just a role, it was a suit of armor. Behind it, he kept the child who had once gone to bed hungry, the young man who had learned never to rely on anyone but himself. Michael said that's why Sean hated interviews. He wasn't being arrogant, he was being cautious. He had learned early that people often listen only to twist, not to understand. And so, he chose silence over stories. Until now. Because through Michael's voice, those unspoken stories are finally being told, not to glorify, but to reveal, to help us see the legend not in black and white, but in full, painful color. The myth versus the man. The world had built a myth around Sean Connery, a towering, unshakable force who commanded every screen he touched. But myths are dangerous. They hide the real person under layers of perfection. And perfection was never Sean's truth. Michael Caine knew this better than anyone. The public saw strength, but Michael saw struggle. The audience saw glamour, but the friend saw grief. Connery carried the weight of being Bond long after he left the role. People never stopped expecting him to be that man, strong, in control, untouchable. But in reality, Sean often felt like he was pretending even off-screen. Michael revealed that Connery privately resented how the character consumed his identity. "They don't see Sean," he once told Michael. "They only see Bond." The burden of living up to a myth slowly drained him. He became guarded, weary of people who approached him for who he played, not who he was. That's why he disappeared from the spotlight, not because he stopped caring, but because he was tired of pretending. Michael said Sean longed for normal conversations, honest relationships, and moments of quiet truth. But fame rarely allows those things. Michael's voice, though calm, carried a quiet sadness.
I think you got the wrong actor.
You both have
Sean
beautiful blue
Connery
eyes.
is in the Caribbean.
Because he saw the cost of the myth. And now, he wants the world to finally see the man who lived behind it. Not James Bond, not the icon, but Sean Connery, the human being who laughed, doubted, feared, and felt deeply. Private battles, public silence. Michael Caine revealed something the cameras never caught. Sean Connery was often at war with himself, not in loud, dramatic ways, but in quiet moments of isolation. There were days when Sean would cancel events without notice, retreat from people, or fall into a silence even his closest friends couldn't break. To the world, he was confident. But behind closed doors, he wrestled with shadows no one could name. Michael remembered one evening when Sean had everything, fame, fortune, admiration, and yet looked completely lost. He poured a drink, sat by the fire, and said, "Sometimes I don't even know who I am anymore." That one line stuck with Michael for years. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a whisper of truth, a man unraveling beneath the weight of his own legend. Connery's struggles weren't dramatic. They were internal, buried under decades of stoicism. He'd been taught to hide weakness. So, he smiled in interviews and vanished when the pain became too much. Michael said those weren't mood swings or arrogance. They were coping mechanisms. A lifetime of covering up wounds the world never saw. For years, people speculated. Some called him difficult, others, a recluse. But now, through Michael's eyes, we understand. Sean wasn't pushing people away. He was trying to protect what little peace he had left. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of battles no one ever knew he was fighting. Hollywood's harshness. Hollywood celebrates you when you shine, but forgets you when you fade. Michael Caine had witnessed that brutal cycle, and he watched Sean Connery live through it in silence. There was a time when Connery was the face of cinema. But fame is a tide. It lifts you high, then pulls you under. Michael said Connery felt that shift deeply, especially in his later years. He didn't complain, but the change was obvious. Invitations stopped. Offers slowed. Rumors replaced recognition. People began to talk more about what Sean used to be, and less about who he still was. That hurt him. Not for the loss of status, but for the loss of meaning. After decades of giving everything to his craft, he felt replaced by younger, louder faces. Michael recalled one conversation where Sean looked out at a party full of rising stars and said, "They don't know what it cost." It wasn't bitterness, it was honesty. The price of greatness was high. And sometimes, when the lights dimmed, it felt like no one remembered what he'd paid. Sean wasn't chasing relevance. He was searching for dignity. That's why he stepped away, not out of pride, but out of principle. He didn't want to beg for roles. He wanted to leave with grace. And through Michael's voice, we finally hear that silent farewell, a man who knew when to walk away, even if it broke his heart to do so. The protective shell. By the time he turned 60, Sean Connery had built a wall around himself so thick that only a few people could reach him. Michael Caine was one of them. He called it a protective shell, a way for Sean to keep the noise out and his peace in. Fame had given him the spotlight, but it had also taken something precious: trust. Michael shared how even simple kindnesses made Sean suspicious. He'd ask, "What do they want?" as if every gesture had strings attached. It wasn't paranoia. It was experience. Too many times Connery had opened his heart, only to be misquoted, misjudged, or misunderstood. So he stopped opening up. Not to friends, but to the world. And that shell worked. It kept him safe. But it also made him lonely. Michael said there were times Sean looked around a crowded room and still felt alone. Not because people weren't there, but because they only saw Bond, not the man beneath the charm. That disconnect grew deeper with age. Michael never tried to force his way through. He simply stayed near, offering presents without pressure, and that's why Sean trusted him. Because in a world of takers, Michael was one of the few who gave without asking. Through that quiet loyalty, he earned the right to see the man behind the wall, and now he's letting the rest of us see him too. A love few knew. Behind every great man is a love story the world barely understands. For Sean Connery, that story was his wife, Micheline. Michael Caine called her the anchor in a life full of storms. When the cameras turned away and the fame began to fade, Micheline remained, steady, loyal, and fiercely protective of the man she loved. Michael shared how Connery often referred to Micheline as his piece. She wasn't drawn to the spotlight, and she never cared for the fame. But she understood Sean in ways no one else did. She knew when to speak and when to let silence heal. In many ways, she saw the fractures in him before anyone else, and instead of walking away, she stayed. There were nights when Sean would spiral, lost in his thoughts, and Micheline would simply sit beside him, holding his hand, saying nothing. That kind of love doesn't make headlines, but it saves lives. Michael said that without her, Sean might have disappeared long before the world noticed. Their bond wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was built on truth, not performance. And in a life defined by roles, Sean found freedom in being himself with her. For Michael, witnessing that love was proof that Connery wasn't just a legend. He was a man capable of deep devotion. And through her, we glimpsed the softer side he kept hidden from the world. The legacy he left. Sean Connery didn't fade into retirement. He chose it. Michael Caine was there when that decision was made, not in a dramatic moment, but in a quiet, soul-searching evening. They had just finished dinner when Sean leaned back, sighed, and said, "I think I'm done pretending." That was it. No headlines, no farewell tour. Just a man choosing peace over performance. Hollywood didn't understand it. Fans were confused. Why would a star like Connery, still admired, step away so completely? But Michael understood. Sean wasn't tired of acting. He was tired of the circus around it. The fakeness, the interviews, the scripts that didn't speak to him anymore. He didn't want to go through the motions. He wanted to feel again, or not do it at all. Michael shared how Connery began to crave stillness. Walks in the garden, quiet breakfasts, long talks without cameras. He wanted to rediscover who he was without the world watching. And that kind of decision doesn't come from weakness. It comes from strength. Retirement, for Connery, wasn't the end. It was a return to himself, to the parts of him he had put on hold for decades. Michael said it was the most courageous role Sean ever played, not Bond, not any hero, but himself. And now, we finally understand why he left. But Michael understood. Sean wasn't tired of acting. He was tired of the circus around it. The fakeness, the interviews, the scripts that didn't speak to him anymore. He didn't want to go through the motions. He wanted to feel again, or not do it at all. Michael shared how Connery began to crave stillness. Walks in the garden, quiet breakfasts, long talks without cameras. He wanted to rediscover who he was without the world watching. And that kind of decision doesn't come from weakness. It comes from strength. Retirement, for Connery, wasn't the end. It was a return to himself, to the parts of him he had put on hold for decades. Michael said it was the most courageous role Sean ever played, not Bond, not any hero, but himself. And now, we finally understand why he left. Not to disappear, but to finally be seen. Reflections from a friend. Michael Caine never thought he'd outlive Sean Connery. Their friendship had felt timeless, like something that would always be there. But life has a way of surprising us with loss. And now, left behind with only memories, Michael found himself revisiting the quiet corners of their past, the moments no one else witnessed. A laugh over coffee, a shared silence, a broken sentence that carried more meaning than words ever could. He didn't speak of Sean as a superstar. He spoke of him as a man who was constantly learning how to carry his own greatness. Sean was never comfortable with being admired, Michael said. He wanted to be understood. That one line captured everything. Connery didn't need applause. He needed acceptance, not of the legend, but of the flawed, vulnerable human inside it. Michael often wonders what Connery would think of today's world, how loud everything's become, how little space is left for stillness. He thinks Sean would have hated the noise, but he also believes Sean would have smiled, knowing his story, his real story, is finally being told. Not by tabloids, not by critics, but by a friend who saw it all. This reflection wasn't meant for fame. It was for healing, for Michael, for Connery's memory, and maybe for us too. Because in hearing the truth, we learn something about our own masks, our own legends, and the hidden selves we keep behind them. The legacy he left. Sean Connery didn't just leave behind a collection of films. He left behind a presence, a kind of timeless force that lingers in every room where his name is mentioned. But as Michael Caine revealed, his true legacy wasn't in the tuxedo or the famous walk. It was in the courage to walk away, to choose authenticity over applause. That's what made Connery unforgettable. Michael described how Sean never let the industry define his worth. He made bold choices, turned down roles that didn't speak to him, fought for stories he believed in, and most importantly, he stood by his principles, even when it cost him. That kind of integrity is rare in Hollywood. It made Connery both admired and misunderstood. People often say legends never die, but Michael believes legends evolve, and through truth, their legacy becomes clearer. For Sean, the real legacy wasn't James Bond. It was the ability to challenge the world's idea of who he should be. He taught us that it's okay to retreat, to protect your peace, to live for yourself when the stage becomes too loud. Michael's voice softened as he recalled Sean's last years. They weren't glamorous, but they were peaceful, surrounded by love, far from the chaos. And maybe that's the most powerful ending anyone can ask for, not in bright lights, but in quiet dignity, a goodbye unspoken. There was no public farewell, no standing ovation. When Sean Connery passed, the world mourned, but Michael Caine mourned differently. His grief wasn't broadcast. It was buried in memories, in laughter that would never return.
Legendary actor Sir Sean Connery has died. That's according to the official James Bond Twitter account.
In stories only the two of them knew. There were things they never got to say. But in their friendship, silence often said enough. Michael didn't rush to post tributes or give interviews. He simply sat with the loss, letting it settle into his heart like a chapter that had quietly ended. "Some goodbyes," he said. "Don't need words." That was how Sean would have wanted it. Quiet, dignified, real. The last time they met, Michael remembered something subtle, a look, a pause, a hand on the shoulder, that now feels like a silent farewell. Neither man said it out loud, but both felt it. That's the kind of bond they had, beyond words, beyond fame, beyond time. Now, as Michael tells the world these stories, it's not to reopen wounds, it's to close them gently, to honor a friend the way only another legend could. And maybe, in these final truths, we all get a chance to say the goodbye we never could, not with headlines, but with understanding. The weight of truth. Telling the truth isn't always easy, especially when it carries the weight of a legend's reputation. Michael Caine struggled with this decision. For years, he guarded Connery's silence like a sacred trust. But now, older, reflective, and standing on the edge of his own life's curtain call, Michael knew it was time to speak. He didn't do it for shock or drama, he did it for legacy. Because truth, when spoken with love, heals more than it hurts. And Michael's truth wasn't harsh, it was honest. It painted a full picture, one with cracks and color, light and darkness. It gave us Sean Connery, the man, not just the myth. Michael believes that legends deserve honesty, not flattery. That real respect means revealing the whole person, not just the parts we like. And in doing so, we allow future generations to understand greatness not as perfection, but as persistence through imperfection. With each word, Michael lifted a burden he had carried quietly for years. Not guilt, but responsibility. He was Connery's friend, not just his colleague, and now he was his final storyteller, the one who could turn whispers into truth and rumors into remembrance. In that act, he gave Sean what Hollywood never could, full humanity. And that perhaps is the greatest gift a friend can leave behind. The man behind the legend. As Michael Caine finished sharing his heart, there was no applause, no dramatic ending, just a soft stillness, the kind that follows when truth has finally been spoken. The world had always seen Sean Connery as untouchable, mysterious, impossibly cool. But Michael offered us something more valuable, a glimpse of the man behind the legend. Not the Bond, not the icon, but the human being who loved, feared, laughed, and struggled like the rest of us. A man who fought to be seen beyond his roles. A man who, even in silence, left echoes that still move us today. Michael didn't break Connery's legend. He completed it by adding the missing pieces, the flaws, the fragility, the forgotten truths. In doing so, he didn't diminish Sean. He elevated him. Because being real is more powerful than being perfect. And being remembered honestly is more sacred than being remembered flawlessly. So now, as we look back on Sean Connery's life, we do so with new eyes. Not just as fans of his films, but as witnesses to his humanity. And we have Michael Caine to thank for that. For his courage, for his loyalty, and for finally confirming what mattered most, that behind the legend stood a man. And that man, flaws and all, was unforgettable. In the end, legends aren't remembered for how perfect they appeared, but for how deeply they were understood. Michael Caine didn't just confirm the rumors, he revealed the soul behind the spotlight. Through grief, friendship, and truth, he gave us a Connery we never truly knew. A man who didn't need to speak loudly to leave echoes that would last forever. His silence was a shield, but Michael's voice became his legacy. Now, as the curtain falls, we don't just see a Bond icon, we see a human story worth remembering. And sometimes, that's the most powerful ending of all.